we jump into the video, I just want to go through a couple of things. So this video is about insulation, and you'll see that when the video starts, but just prior to that, I want to go over, try and get rid of a bit of confusion. I know there's a lot of information out there on the internet about these two things, insulation and vapor barriers, and I just wanted to sort of try and make it a bit clearer if I can. So insulation is anything like fiberglass wall, like you get in your house, recycled plastic wall, which is a bit more popular in the van world, and also spray foam. Now the job of the insulation is to keep the hot air out in summer and the warm air in winter. Basically, the job of insulation full stop is to always keep an ambient sort of temperature within the living area. Now a vapor barrier is there to stop the two different temperature airs meeting, so your cold outside air meeting the warm inside air, or the super hot outside air meeting the cooler inside air, depending on the season. Now vapor barriers are basically always something foil, so double bubble aluminium foil is a really common one, as it acts slightly as an insulator as well because the air pockets, and also foil tape is really common as well. So they're your two sort of components. Now there is another category that you will see everywhere, and this is something that covers both. So a super common insulator slash vapor barrier is insulation board, otherwise known as Celotex, which is a brand, and Kingspan as well. Now these are really good because you have foil backing and then the insulation and then another foil layer. It's like a sandwich almost. It's an ideal world. You can't always achieve this ideal with using separate wall insulation and foil, so that's why a lot of people choose to use insulation board in as many places as they can, because it offers that perfect solution with vapor barrier, insulation, then secondary vapor barrier. Now we'll move on to a diagram. So if you imagine this is the skin of your van, the wall of your van. This is the outside and this is the inside. Now what the insulation board offers is, like I said before, is a really good solution, because you have your first layer of foil, which is your first vapor barrier, your first layer of defence, and that will reflect any cold air coming through the skin of the van back out away from your van. Then you have your insulation layer, so keeping the warm air in the van, or whichever way around it wants to be. Then you have your secondary vapor barrier, which is reflecting the warm air back into the van. So at no point should it touch the cold air coming from the skin of the van. This is when condensation occurs. So when two different temperature airs meet is when you get condensation, and that's what everyone wants to avoid. So this is an ideal world. Now when you hear people say about continuous vapor barriers, right, let's imagine you're in the van. So you've got your walls insulated, your floor insulated, and your ceiling insulated, and you've got that super ideal insulation board all round. So you've got your vapor barrier, your insulation, then your other vapor barrier. When you hear people talk about continuous vapor barriers, which I've heard a lot, I'm sure you would have heard a lot as well, if you're doing any sort of research into vans, the idea of a continuous vapor barrier is to bridge the gaps. So where your floor foil or your floor vapor barrier doesn't quite meet your wall vapor barrier, you normally use foil tape or double bubble foil, as mentioned before, to bridge that gap, so you have this so-called continuous vapor barrier. And all this is plug in the corners. So where the insulation from the ceiling doesn't meet the walls, which doesn't meet the floor, is foil tape or double bubble foil insulation to bridge that gap and have a continuous all-in-one solid vapor barrier. Now this is an ideal case. It's not always realistic. Yeah, you can't achieve this every time. It won't be possible because of the shape of the van or whatever, but this is an ideal world. So as a minimum you want one vapor barrier at least, normally on the inside. So you have yourself in the van, then a vapor barrier reflecting the warm air back in, then your insulation, then your skin, if you can't have a vapor barrier both sides. I just wanted to go over this before I got into my insulation videos, because I know I mentioned a few words like vapor barrier and insulation board and stuff, and I wanted to make it clear before we got into the video so you had an idea of what the video was about. Now we're going to take up the floor. It's just balanced there, so it's just in place. So we're going to move that, take that out, and then cut the insulation to size so it's going to fit in between the battens, and then we'll lay that down. Now we're going to measure the gaps in between the battens. and cut the insulation board to fit. We have drawn out the different panels of insulation that need to be cut, so we measured them all, got all the measurements there, so we can just cut it all in one go and not have to keep coming back into the van. We've now got our sheets of insulation cut. These are the only offcuts we've got. So we had a sheet 1200 by 2400, and that's what I got left from doing the floor. Started using a handsaw and then realised I should try the jigsaw to see if it's easier, and it's a lot easier, so recommend using the jigsaw if you've got one. To prevent squeaks, I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone on the bottom of the Celotex insulation, or the insulation board, and then put it down. The insulation is now fitted, so I need to tape up the gaps with aluminium foil tape next. So originally I put these small bits of wood in the corner just to give something the floor to screw to, the ply floor to screw to in the corners. But on reflection, I think what I'm going to do is take them out and then just put some insulation board there. That will provide enough support for the floor, because we've got a batten here and a batten here anyway. So I'm going to do that next. Removed from the wood from this side as well. I just made a template out of some scrap foil for the insulation board, so that'll be my template there. And then we got the same here, a little square template, so we'll cut some insulation and stick that down there.
That should be fine.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Replacement pieces here now, so that insulation's now cut and then I just taped around. Same this side, so we got the square in there, which replaced where that wood was, and then foil tape around the inside so we still have a nice vapour barrier. You can now see I've got my continuous vapour barrier on the floor. So what will happen next is when the walls get insulated, and then I'll put the double bubble foil over that, and then I'll just bridge the gap between the floor and the wall insulation with some tape again, and then that'll have my floor vapor barrier up, wall vapor barrier and round, which will finish off the insulation. But for now, the floor is done. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, where I'll be insulating the walls.